Good evening, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to Living Waters, falling deeper in love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts and guests this evening, Lauren Cruz.
I am Stephanie Pavlantos.
And we are continuing with our book, The Restitution of All Things by Joseph Farah. And we are moving along. We're up to chapter 8, but chapter 8's a little controversial.
Yeah.
So we have brought in an additional helper. You want to introduce him?
So this is my son, Matthew. He's my oldest. He's one of my twins, if you've heard me talk about my twins. So he's my firstborn, but yeah, so he loves history. He speaks Arabic, and he's been to Israel. He's been to Egypt. He loves all this kind of stuff, this Middle Eastern stuff. And that is what we're really talking about tonight. So thank you, Matthew, for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Let me be part of it.
Yeah. So it's kind of a last minute. I'm like, Matthew can really help us talk about this.
And just for the record, I've already ordered 3 more books.
Yeah.
Matthew, we have a joke that my husband won't let me be friends with Stephanie because every time we talk, I order more books.
Yeah.
So I know that you're going to help us out this evening by sharing some information you've gleaned as well.
And
so the whole
can I
premise
start by
of it,
giving a couple of we want to give you a couple of websites. So this first website is called Bible-history.com. So it's not necessarily what everything we're talking about, but it's called Bible History, Maps, Images, and Archaeology. And so they have lots of categories, lots and lots of information. So that's Bible-history.com. And then the second one, in which some of the books we're going to be talking about, is at joelstrumpet.com. So it's JOELS trumpet, all one word.com. And if you go under free resources, you can actually get the PDF of some of these books, because Joel Richardson is an author who Joseph Farah actually published some of these books for him, and a lot of the material he goes over in this book comes from these books of Joel's.
Right.
So that's why we offer them. So
I guess. Oh, and I did. They're on Kindle right now. Very inexpensive. They're like $3 if you're a Kindle reader or want to have that as a resource.
Yeah,
they're very inexpensive on Kindle right now, all 3 of them. So yeah. So Stephanie, I guess we should at least set the stage. Like, what are we talking about this evening? What have we discovered this week?
Right. Oh, so this we lost him.
We lost him. He'll come back. There he is. Great.
So this chapter 9, is titled, "Is the Antichrist Alive and Well on Planet Earth Today?"
Right.
So big question. We all like to know that, right? We all talk about stuff like this. And but I think that we're probably going to surprise you in some of the things he says.
Right. Because
he does talk about some things that we have been taught that are kind of wrong.
Right. I know that wrong. As I grew up in the church, and every time we ever attacked any of the prophetic books, especially Revelation, there's a big idea, a big description of Babylon's statue and all the different kingdoms that it represents. And if you go into the Bible and look in, it gives you subheadings already listed, so you know what countries are going to be discussed in that. And so when I went back and reread it, and sure enough, everything's there, and it talks about the various countries that have conquered Israel and Babylon, and the continuing war with them, and the whole Middle East. But what he prefaced, and I was always taught when we read Revelation, that the 7 hills are represent Rome, because Rome is surrounded and built on 7 hills, and so that's always the final kingdom that's going to be conquering. And that's where we get a lot of the idea that the Antichrist will come out of Rome or Europe, because of that one little suggestion, right?
But however, we need to start back
Right.
What
Suggestions.
misinformation was, and that is who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so, Matthew, you can kind of lead us in with that if you want.
Yeah,
so
please do.
Okay. Yes. So if you read, now I don't know all the books that you've mentioned, but if you read the book The Mideast Beast by Joel Richardson, he does go into that particular criteria of in Daniel, where it talks about the people of the prince who is to come. People typically think, oh, the temple was destroyed by the Roman Emperor Titus. Therefore, the people of the prince who is to come must be Romans or revived Romans. But actually, if you go read, I believe it's Josephus, and it's mentioned in the book, they mention that all the soldiers that took part in the siege of Jerusalem and the siege of the temple were not Romans. They were not Italians. They were not Latin speakers. They all came from the east. Because of this revolt that was going on, they didn't have time to ship troops from Italy over to Israel. They took the auxiliary troops that they had already stationed in Egypt, in Arabia, in Syria, and brought them to Jerusalem.
Right.
So most of the troops that are attacking at this point are Eastern peoples. Some of them are Arabs, some of them are Egyptians. These are people that don't like the Jews.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that Josephera states, and it is Josephus. He does a lot of quoting of the various generals and troop leaders to say who, where they got their fighting men from. So,
right,
yeah,
and we I mean, and Rome, I guess you could say they're the umbrella over all of this, but they were getting there, like Matthew said, and like Joseph Farah says, I mean, they were getting all of their people from the Middle East. And so people like from, like he said, Egypt, Arabia, Syria. So these people, I mean, they had a problem already with the Jews, so they had no problem joining with Rome. Oh, yeah, let's put these people, let's do our own thing. And he even talks about Titus being sent, I believe, to shut it down, right?
Yes, he did not want to destroy the temple. He wanted to keep it and loot it as a prize. But the Arab soldiers that were part of the contingents, they got out of hand and they set fire to the temple. It was not ordered by Titus. They did it of their own accord.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because that's one of the fallacies, I guess, that we have been just trained to understand and told and led to believe all my life.
In fact,
I know that there's a frieze, the Titus arch that's in Italy, has the treasures of the temple being carried off, and so it's always portrayed and shown. I mean, every seminary class shows you this frieze from the arch saying these are Titus's soldiers carrying off the treasures of the temple, and
which they are, but it wasn't his idea. In fact, once he knew that the temple was on fire, he tried to stop it, but it was too late.
Yeah, and he even says that he goes, these Syrian people, these Islamic and Arab people, they weren't intimidated by Rome. They didn't care that they were doing something that Rome didn't want them to. And
they weren't Muslims, but yes, at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, but when he sent his troops and his son to tell them to stop, they were basically, stop the fire, stop this burning. You have to put an end to it. And they just didn't pay attention. They just carried it out. And so I think it's interesting the time that we're living in, because we see a lot of fallacies coming up where it's like, no, this isn't like the whole story. Yeah, Rome was involved. They hired them. They brought them in, but who was it who really did it? And those are some of the things that are coming out, I think, more and more in our history and in our present time that we didn't really think about. So, yeah.
So another one, I guess we should move to the next. We often think that Russia is going to be huge. Russia and China are going to be huge players in the end time chessboard. And what I did appreciate with Joseph Ferris' chapter is he went through and he pretty much pulled almost every Bible verse that talked about who is coming against Israel in the end times. And he was very clear about identifying who those countries were today, because we don't have the same names. We have, obviously. Right. And Russia wasn't mentioned.
Yeah. Matthew, what are some of the countries?
You have to correct me on some of the names, but the Meshach and Tubal, which was part of Gog and Magog, that's all in Turkey.
It is.
And even some of those tribes were, I think, in the southern Caucasus region, but that's still very Islamic area, very Turkish influenced area. And so Joel Richardson makes the point, I don't know if Joseph Farah makes it as well, but that it's more likely that the Antichrist would be, if not Turkish, at least Muslim, because these people groups that are mentioned in connection with Gog and Magog are in the country of Turkey.
He does. He says that he doesn't say Turkey, but he definitely says that there's definitely more evidence in the Bible that the Antichrist would be of Muslim descent. So yeah,
and, like we think of Gomer as being part of Germany, but it's actually part of Turkey. And Magog, right, Matthew? Do you remember Magog was? Oh, Magog, you said was Turkey, but so all these places are right in that Middle East, and Turkey is, it's mainly taken over by the Muslims nowadays,
right?
Because parts of Turkey used to be parts of Greece, and then I learned that from my own husband, because being Greek, they have a big issue with the Turks, and as he will put it. And because I think his grandfather was part of that war between the Greeks and and Turkey. So it's interesting history. But one thing I just wanted to go back to is that he brings out the different scriptures. So he talks about Micah 5, Habakkuk 3, and this is Numbers 24. So some of these you can go back and look at, and he's talking about, but when these Arabs came and plundered and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, they were, I don't know, I mean, it doesn't sound like Rome itself was wanting to destroy all the people, but they wanted to kill the Jews. So it was genocide. They were, I think I read the atrocities were actually disobeying Roman orders, like these unspeakable genocidal atrocities.
Yes, it wasn't the Romans. They had no intention of destroying the temple. That was not their plan. It was just to put down the rebellion. But the soldiers got out of hand. Once they started killing, they didn't stop. And nobody could make it.
Yeah, but I mean, and not to be crude, but it just says that they, I mean, the ways that they killed them, I don't want to be gross, but they basically just cut people open, like they were cattle. So,
I think it's probably a good point to make too. Joseph Farah says, who against Christianity and the Jew, who is the greatest enemy to Christianity and Judaism today? It's Islam. And what will they do if you do not follow the rules? They are the people group who will kill those who are not following their rules. So even today, you have that extreme force against anyone who's not one of them. So yeah. I was looking through the book, and the countries that are mentioned, he has Moab, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan.
Yeah.
And he's got Assyria, which is part of Iran, parts of Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria today. So that was Assyria. We've got lots of Tyre and Sidon, which is the coast of Palestine.
Gaza.
Gaza. He has Saudi Arabia is mentioned. I think I mentioned that. Jordan, the country of Jordan.
Lebanon.
So these are all the countries that are completely surrounding Israel. And, they move against Israel. So.
And then we need to go back to Daniel a little bit and clear up some things there.
Yeah.
Well,
so where do we go? Where should we go?
Yeah, where do we go
I'm
next?
all over the place.
Anything you want to add there before we keep moving on?
Yeah.
No, pretty much covered everything, I think, in that.
Okay.
So we're kind of going through this chapter, Matthew, just so you know, because I know Matthew he's read all these books. So again, the Islamic Antichrist, and we'll get to that too, because that's pretty interesting. The Mideast Beast, and they're all from the same author. For you, those of you just joining us, When a Jew Rules the World. Joel Richardson is his name, and Mystery Babylon is the last book. And again, he is going from an Islamic point of view of in the sense of showing us from Islam what's happening. No, Matthew is my son. So somebody just asked. Matthew is my son, for those of you joining late. He's my oldest son. So, but yeah, so there's been a lot of just bad information. And I think even, and maybe not even on purpose, but just because it was misunderstood. That's okay. She said, sorry. But it was just that I think from people who didn't understand themselves what had happened, because generally we can say Rome did some of this stuff, but it really wasn't Rome itself.
Right. Yeah.
And the direction of Rome.
Yeah. I think I even mentioned too. I mean, I did a simple Google search. If you ask when did Rome take over Babylon, they have it. Rome has never taken over Babylon. So
yeah. So
let's not get too far into that. We probably should talk about Daniel.
Yes. So let's go to now this is on 174 in the book, if you're following with us. Again, for those who joined late, we're talking about this book by Joseph Farah. So so somebody said we're still in Rome today, and that is a very common belief. But I think that Rome is not what we think of it anymore, because most of Europe and most of the world is being slowly really infiltrated by Islam. They have many children, and think about the American culture. What do? We keep our families small, and we don't have all the children. But what does Islam do? They have 10, 12 children. So because they want to take over, that's their purpose. So even when we look at places in Europe that we think of being Rome, there are a lot of Muslims there. So in Europe.
Right.
There's been a lot of immigration from the Middle East in the last 10 years.
Big time. Yeah.
Plus just reproduction as well.
Yeah.
And that's the point that he's making. So there's lots of comments, and thank you for your comments. And we can't get to them all, but we'll pull some up. But the point that he's making is that where we have been taught it's Rome and it's Russia doing all these things, and in the end times and what we see in Revelation, even, it is not. It is not Rome. It's not Russia. It is all about the people who hate the Jews, which is the Arabs, the Middle East, the sons really of Ishmael. So
I think it's important to fundamentally remember, we've said this on the show a lot. Revelation was written by a Jewish author to a Jewish audience who was beginning to have Gentile influence, but at that time they weren't going to church. There was no new religion created at that time. Christianity wasn't there. They still very much worshipped and practiced very, very much according to Hebrew guidelines. And so you have to understand, America is not in here. This is not.
No, it's not about us.
It's not about America. It's not about Europe. It's not about China.
It's about Israel and her enemies. And that's
other countries will be involved. There's wars and rumors of wars. That means the world is going to be at war. But the end times are to usher in a very Jewish king, Yeshua, and he's not going to come and take the throne in America. He's going to Israel, and Israel will be attacked. So that's why it's so important to be very aware of what's going on in the Middle East.
Matthew, were you going to say something?
I was just going to follow up that yes, the Bible is focused on Israel, and I know some people will say, "Oh, there's no mention of the U.S. in the Bible, therefore we must not exist." I was like, I don't necessarily think that has to be the case.
Right. I don't either.
Just because I have a magnifying glass on the Middle East doesn't mean, America doesn't matter. Europe doesn't matter. I'm focused on Turkey, Israel, Egypt, whatever. Those countries may try to negotiate something, but they may not.
I think we'll be that there. There's a ripple effect. Anytime there's a war and anytime there's anything going, there's obviously a ripple effect. So I think that other countries are going to be involved, but I think we're going to be on the sidelines of things, not the primary force, if you will.
Carlos brings up a few points here. We are Israel, and we're not, we can take that different ways, I guess, because we haven't replaced Israel, but we are grafted into Israel. So everything that we would not have what we call Christianity without the Jews. They were the first missionaries. So we wouldn't be where we are if it weren't for them. And there are many, many Jews coming to Messiah. A lot of them are in hiding. I think we just needed to address that because we can't dismiss them at all. And we can't think that we've taken over because that's kind of anti-Semitic, but we haven't replaced them because we have to understand that we are grafted into Israel, and they're not out of the picture by any sense of the imagination.
Right. So Matthew, I'm curious from the various books, Joel Richardson, what are some high points that have really stuck with you about this?
One thing that has really always stuck with me from all of his books is, especially I think it was the Mideast Beast, where he talks about in Daniel the Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue of the metal. I forget what chapter that is. If it's
chapter 2. I think it's in chapter 2.
Yes. Where he goes through, because most people will say, oh, the head of gold is Babylon, the chest and arms of silver is Persia, the legs are
Rome,
and the feet are the revived Roman Empire. And what he basically says is that that's not the case. Again, think about it. This dream was given to a Babylonian king. So Babylon is kind of like the center point, Babylon and Jerusalem. So when Daniel interprets the vision and says, the last kingdom crushes all the others, you have to think, because Babylon existed, then the Persians conquered Babylon, and their empire was much bigger than Babylon. It went from the Indus River to almost Greece, and then the Greeks conquered Persia and took over their territory. But then that's where you get into saying, oh, Rome follows Greece, which historically is accurate, but when you're looking at the prophecy, Rome never conquered Babylon. They never conquered Iran. The only nation that didn't get conquered by them was anything further past Jerusalem. But the Islamic Caliphate that followed the Romans certainly did. They certainly conquered everything that the Persians had, everything that Babylon controlled, and that's part of it. So that there's kind of a breakdown. We kind of stop at Rome, and we don't really think past that.
Yeah, that was something Joseph Farah very much made a point of in his book. We all get stuck at Rome, and we just say, okay, that's it. But there's hundreds of years beyond that where the Middle East is conquered, and definitely he very much emphasizes that.
And if we go back to Daniel, we see these kingdoms. So now Daniel goes from this statue in chapter 2 to now these beasts. And we see that there's 4 different types of beasts. And we always think that Rome is the last beast, but actually you have the Medes and the Persians, or you have Babylon, and then the Medes and the Persians, and then Greece. But the 4th one is a combination of all of these. And like I said, Turkey has taken over parts of what was part of Greece. And then the Muslims have also taken over what used to be Babylon and what used to be Persia. So when you look at that, then this 4th beast is not Rome, but it's a combination. It's basically Islam. Do you agree with that, or am I thinking correct?
I would say so. Basically, part of looking at it is like looking at the territory that these empires controlled. Rome, like I said, they only got like half of it. Most of it was in Europe. But who conquered the Romans? Again, we'll stop at like 476 when the last emperor was deposed in the West, but the Eastern Empire was conquered by the Ottoman Turks, who then went on to control most of this territory, that we're talking about. So they were following the Arabic caliphates that controlled all of Iran, all of Egypt, and eventually Turkey once the Ottomans took over. So it's more, in terms of territory, it's a better fit. And certainly the Romans were not necessarily as brutal as the Islamic caliphates were. The Romans, basically, as long as you paid your taxes, it didn't cause trouble, they let you do what you wanted. They let the Jews practice their faith, which is more than we said of the Greeks. They let people kind of observe their own customs, just pay homage to Caesar and move on with life. But once the Muslims start invading all these areas, they're very much, historically they had to be more tolerant, because you can only govern that many people for so long when you're a small minority. But as they became more powerful over time, they started kind of destroying the cultures that they had invaded. The eastern area of the Roman Empire used to speak Greek. They used to be Christians, and now that whole area is Muslim, both religiously, culturally, linguistically. Everyone speaks Arabic. Even Persia used to have their own culture and their own country, and it's very, it's all Muslim now. They don't really have a separate Persian identity. And so that's one of the points that Joel Richardson makes, that Islam kind of takes these cultures and crushes them so that they no longer exist.
Right.
Yeah. And you see pictures of Persia in the 70s, and all the women, basically, besides their skin and culture, they look no different than us. They're at the beaches, they're in jeans, they're in t-shirts, and then Islam moves in, and now it's a totally different place.
Totally different place. Yeah, very much so.
So very good, Matthew. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And should we bring up Gog and Magog? Because when we read that in Ezekiel, we think Gog and Magog is all about Russia invading.
Well, I'm curious, Matthew, do you know why? I mean, that's just something that's always been taught. You know, Gog and Magog is Russia. Why? Where does that come from? Do you know?
I don't quite know. I think it's because the assumption was that those tribes migrated north. I know, if I get my name's correct, Joel Rosenberg more prefers that view that Russia is Gog. So
yes, he
for those
has.
that
I've
are
read his
interested,
books.
for those that are interested, maybe looking to see how he supports that view. I'm not quite sure how we kind of interpret it as Russia. I think a case could be made that we as Americans just don't like the Russians. And when we're teaching all these things, the significance of Islam has really only happened within the last 20 or 30 years. And I think historically, we as Americans have seen Russia as a much bigger threat. But that's not being the case now as things are shaping up.
And their issue has never been against, I mean, I won't say never, that's the wrong word, but we don't see them coming up against the Jewish state as much as we see Islam coming up against the Jewish state.
Well, we know they attacked Israel. They were part of the attack of Israel, but one time, I mean, how many times in history? I mean, that was minimal. If you had to compare the two countries, very much, very different.
Yeah. Someone said, will they back Iran?
That's the $1 million question. Yeah. Likely. There are partnerships between.
I have no reason to doubt that if this happens, sure, the Middle East will be kind of center stage, but the Chinese, Russians, whoever would probably be, in the sidelines cheering them on. They won't be leading the charge.
Yeah. They'll just support them and pay for things. So, because ultimately they all want world domination. So if they can take out one country at a time, they're fine with that,
Yeah,
so
that's already a thing. I mean, they are already working together. So
exactly. Yeah. One pays for the other to do what they do. Just like we see. And here's the thing, when you look at Revelation, and especially, I don't know that people really know, but when we look at the 4 horses, we have the first horse being white. Well, Laban from the Bible, Laban means white. And what does white mean? It's the color of counterfeit. It's a color of deception. So the first horse is definitely somebody coming in deception. The second horse is red. Well, Esau meant red. And Esau was part of Edom. So we have this whole Edom, which are basically all Jewish anti-Semitic people, Jewish haters, I should say, and anti-Semitic people. And so the way I see that second horse, that red horse is it's making war. Well, who is it going to make war with? It's going to make war with Israel because that's who they hate. So we have to go and look at some of these things from the perspective of the Jews. And we can't look at Revelation from our perspective of the church or even as Americans. We have to look at it from a Jewish perspective to truly understand it. And we get a lot of good comments here. But I think that's where then when we get into Revelation. I'm sorry.
Say again.
Sorry. I was just going to bring up another point is that you mentioned, Mom, you mentioned the anti-Semitic part of it. Well, like the Russians are not anti-Semitic. It's not part of their culture to be anti-Semitic. You may have, part of that being used, but it's not like ideology. Whereas if you look at Islam itself, that is part of their end time theology. Even their whole doctrine is the Jews are descendants of apes and pigs, so we can go ahead and kill them. Muhammad tried to convert the Jews that lived in Arabia, and when they turned on him, then he became very hostile and said all these very bad things about them.
Right.
And that's just been carried on.
Like Martin Luther. I mean, when he couldn't convert the Jews to Christianity, then he turned on them, and he became very anti-Semitic. And we don't realize that anti-Semitism is growing. I mean, all you have to do is look in the news, you know, is to see that. But the shame of it is it's growing in the church. So we have to be on guard against that. So, Lauren, is there something, where do you want to go next?
No, I was trying to find, I actually, and I'm was scouring over the chapter, but I had read something this week, and the description of it was so similar to what Hamas had done just recently. Because when I was reading it, I mean, it was talking about going in when they're, at slumber and on Sabbath. I mean, it was just very telling. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Things have already begun. I do, the title is the Antichrist alive and well on planet Earth today? It wouldn't surprise me. We definitely have a ramping up of antichrist and anti-Semitic doctrine and theology. America was attacked 9/11 by sleeper cells that we didn't have any idea about. And I live in the South, and immigration is a real thing. With what's coming through the southern border and taking over the southern half of the United States. I'm a public school teacher, and I have a large variety of students that are placed in my classrooms that don't speak English, and they're new immigrants. And so it's alive and well. And I do believe that things are, the chessboard is still being moved around, know. I think we're definitely in the beginnings of things.
Yeah. And Lori asked, Martin Luther did create the Lutheran Church.
Right.
He did good things. Don't get me wrong. Because he wanted to show the Catholics where they were wrong about things. And, but he, as time went on, he became very anti-Semitic and was angry with the Jews for not accepting what he was preaching.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the Lutheran Church. It was a huge, we get the term Protestant because he protested against. Because at the early time, we moved from Judaism, we moved into Christianity, if you will, and it was called Catholicism because it's just known as one faith, that everybody was a Catholic because that was the only faith. And then as beliefs and, there were two sects of Pharisees, and so as our religion began to grow as followers of Yeshua, various denominations. And so, yes, the Lutheran Church, but also Protestantism, which is a big break from Catholicism.
Yeah, good point. This question is good. They ask, how does Yeshua fit in the scenario of the end times? And we're going to get to that because I didn't want to jump ahead, but we start talking about that, or this chapter does. And I think there's some interesting points here. In the first point he brings out on 180, he said, and then I'm just going to read something there at the bottom. If you are expecting some European Antichrist to behead millions of people who won't accept him as God, you are probably going to be very surprised. But who is already chopping off people's heads today? Right. Who has been doing it for the last 1,300 years? And that, of course, the answer is Islam. Right. So he goes on to say Ezekiel 31 compares the Assyrian. So he then puts the whole passage of Ezekiel 31 here. And what he is saying is the Assyrian is another name for the Antichrist in this chapter of 31, Ezekiel 31. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's other notes that he mentions other scripture that refer to it as the Assyrian, not just, I mean, that's like a title.
Yeah,
The Assyrian.
The Assyrian, not a Assyrian or
right.
Assyria, but the Assyrian.
Right. I thought it was interesting. Kind of, there's a if you look up Micah 4:2, our question was, how does Yeshua, fit into the end times? If you look through, there's so much in there. Last week we talked about conquering, so how he comes and conquers various countries, and a big one is Egypt. And so yet again, another, Middle Eastern Muslim country, and he kind of sweeps through Edom. There is a reference of him coming from Edom as well, which is Jordan. Edom is Jordan. And so there's a lot of references of him coming as the conquering king. Just as the Jews were expecting a conquering king at that time, they got a servant. We're expecting, we've kind of turned Jesus into this servant, but when he returns, he comes more as the conquering king. So,
and last week he talked about that he will go to Egypt and destroy Egypt and save those who turn to him. And then this week he's talking about Pharaoh. And on 182, he says, so here in Ezekiel 31, we see God likening Pharaoh, who is also a type of Antichrist, to the Assyrian. And that's the thing we have to understand, is that there throughout history, there have been antichrists. We see it and he stops actually and talks about Hanukkah and the Antichrist, because Antiochus, was that his name?
Antiochus Epiphanes.
Sorry, I knew it was wrong when I heard myself say it. But Antiochus was, don't laugh at me, Matthew, a type of Antichrist. He knows. It's like, Mom, you just can't talk. So, but Antiochus
Epiphanes.
Really, did I say it wrong?
Nope.
Okay. So this is really sad, because we don't understand some of what happened at Hanukkah. And he tells of a story of a woman named Hannah and her 7 sons who were brought before Antiochus. And each one was tortured and killed because they wouldn't bow down. And all of this torture and killing ended up making them revolt against him. And then when the priests started kind of bowing down, who were supposed to, be serving the one true God, then they actually killed a priest, and because he was going to offer a sacrifice to a false god. So he goes through all that, but he was all that just to say he was a type of Antichrist, and that is what we're gonna, we've seen throughout history. So the main Antichrist that we think of is the one who comes, in the 7 years of tribulation, if you will. So it's very interesting, but we can say Antichrist and mean more than one person a lot of times.
Right. The whole idea of Antichrist. Yeah, which is definitely our end time.
Yeah, anti-Messiah. Somebody said they won't use Christ. Yeah, a lot of the Jewish people don't understand the word Christ. They don't realize that it's the Greek version of the anointed one. And that's basically what Messiah means, is the anointed one. So it's just interesting. Language, language is language. So everybody has their way of saying things.
Definitely. So. Yeah, I just think there's a lot more to it. I think now that as history is becoming even more available online, and what people are researching, and books that are out there, and I mean, now you can read Josephus' whole book, so you're able to get more information. And some of this I don't think has been correct. Some of the teachings has not been correct.
Yeah. So Matthew, do you want to tell them, like, where's the Antichrist coming from?
Who do you think? Where do you think?
Well, I think Joe Richardson does a very good job of kind of making the case that it's going to come from Turkey. Reason being is that he makes the case again that the last empire is an Islamic caliphate. Well, the Islamic caliphate was only abolished in 1923. And that's because the Ottoman Empire, in addition to being an empire and a monarchy, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was also the Caliph of Islam, which is like the Pope. He's the one that had authority over all Muslims everywhere. And in order to kind of get that caliphate back, all you would need to do is somehow restore it. And the last person to hold it was Turkey. And even the current president of Turkey, President Erdogan, has been very open about the fact that he wants to make Turkey great again, so to speak, and restore the Ottoman Empire. Whether he would actually do that, I doubt it, but he certainly wants to kind of put the idea in people's heads. I don't think he's the Antichrist, but he's certainly he's kind of setting the stage for someone to come along and say that.
But the Islam people are waiting for their own Messiah, correct?
They are. Yes, they are.
Yes.
I really recommend the book, The Islamic Antichrist, because that kind of starts all of this. The rest of them are almost like sequels.
Okay. So this book up here for the.
Yes, that would be the one to start, because that takes a good look at the history of Islam and the theology of Islam. What are they expecting their end times prophecies to look like? Basically, what they want is who we would call the Antichrist.
Right. Yeah. So their Messiah is our anti-Messiah, in a sense.
And their anti-Messiah is our Messiah.
Right. So Jesus is their Antichrist, in a sense, if you want to put it in that term. So yeah. So it's very interesting, and I think that's what we have. That is why, I've often thought, and this again is just my opinion, but who else could make a treaty?
I was just thinking about that. Yes.
With Jerusalem, with Israel, that we will not fight anymore. We'll let you build your temple, but Muslims or Islam, they would be, if they could form some kind of treaty between them.
Okay. But Stephanie, who owns the Temple Mount right now?
The Jordanians.
The Jordanians, but Islam, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you want to put it that way,
Yeah.
So if they gave it back to the Jews and said, here, out of good faith, we're going to give this back to you so you can build your temple, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what would that do? That would cause all sorts of peace. It'd be false peace. It'd be temporary peace. But yeah, and then you've got this Islam Messiah coming in and saying, no, guess what? I'm taking it all back. So,
or
so
maybe
you see how it unfolds.
Repeat.
I said he would be the one to make the treaty, because it would have to be someone that all Muslims respected.
Exactly.
If a European or an American tried to make that treaty, oh my goodness, the whole Middle East would just blow up.
Right. You're right. You're absolutely right. So I think what we can get out of this chapter is basically that everything we've learned that has to do with Rome and Russia is not mentioned in Scripture, and it's not about them. It's not about us. It's about Israel and Islam, or those people, the countries that surround Israel that hate her and have always hated her. That is where it's going to come to a head.
Because going back to Gog and Magog, again, look at your study Bibles. Most of them, I think, in the Table of Nations in Genesis, will say that those tribes, Meshach and Tubal, are in Asia Minor, which is Turkey. And then if you look at the Ezekiel 38 and 39, the countries that are with them, Egypt, Libya, Punt. Punt is Sudan, and others. These are all Middle Eastern countries.
They are very much so. And very thick with Islam. Very much so.
Ethiopia is very thick.
I was just going to say Ethiopia as well. Yeah.
not as much. They're not as anti-Semitic as the Sudanese,
Okay.
but they do have a minority. Their roots were actually more in Orthodoxy.
Okay.
But yeah, in terms of taking over the country and leading the country, I wouldn't expect it to come from the country that we call Ethiopia. It'd be more from Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
That's generally what was meant, because the word there in Ethiopia that we translate as Ethiopia is really the region of Nubia, which is the lower Nile.
Okay.
That
Okay.
area is controlled by Sudan.
Okay.
Ethiopia, the country we call Ethiopia, is further down.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. He on 178, he's got, you can look at many ancient maps, see Magog listed plain as day, not in Russia, not in Ukraine, but in Turkey. Goes through and lists all where all of these biblical names.
Yeah, and he's got some good maps in here too.
He does.
So, and I know it doesn't show up very well for people to see, but basically by the darkest colors are Muslim lands, then you have Islamic empire and how much it grew. So the darker grew into the little bit lighter, and then the darkest is what took over all of the land. So this is all Islamic land.
Right.
And so it's yeah, so I don't think we realize how far and wide it is spreading, and it will continue to spread because they want more world dominance too. So like every other country. Yeah.
Lauren, you asked how the whole Russia is the Antichrist thing got started, and I started to remember that I think what most people believe is that those tribes of Meshech and Tubal started in Asia Minor, but historically those people groups migrated up to Russia.
Okay.
Oh.
And because again, there's also the bias of, well, Turkey doesn't mean anything. We're afraid of the Soviets, the Russians. So we just say, oh, this must be Russia because these people groups migrate up to Russia.
Okay.
Right now.
That makes sense.
Yeah, he even makes a comment. He says, I remember back in the Cold War days when some prophecy teachers were suggesting that Gomer mentioned in Magog coalition was Germany, but in ancient maps you see that Gomer is in Turkey too. So, people, I think the Cold War and our feelings towards Russia and all of that, I think played a huge part in who we think our enemy is.
Yeah, it's funny because we do that with the whole Bible. We take our worldview and now insert it into a very Hebrew worldview. And we don't necessarily think of it any other way. And then teacher upon teacher upon teacher, pastor upon pastor tells us the same thing. Yeah. And so we're like, what? We're going to disbelieve everybody who's ever taught us. But we're kind of at that point where we just like, stop talking. Let me just do my own research and read people, who really know, and they're not just saying the same things over and over. So I think it's important that we study, that we are good studiers of the word and good studiers looking for truth.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts or anything that you think is very important for us to know, Matthew? We've got about 5 minutes or so, not quite 5 minutes.
Well, the point I kind of want to end with is like, we're talking a lot about how Islam is kind of the cause of a lot of this end times stuff, but I don't want people to say, oh, you're Muslim, therefore you're evil, or oh, this is what I heard on the internet that Muslims are going to cause all this trouble. Like, no. The ideology is bad. That there's no denying that. That's in their holy books, but I don't think you should take that and say Muslims are bad people. I've been to Israel 3 times. I've been to Egypt, before, a couple years ago, and like I enjoyed that so much. The people are very hospitable, very, very kind. I was in Egypt and I lacked for nothing. My friend, he took us everywhere. He told us where to go, what to do. I love the Middle East. I love the Arab peoples. I learned Arabic, but there is a line between what Satan is going to use this ideology for and the people that are kind of stuck in it.
Right. And I know, I too have a friend of mine who radically saved through a dream. Yeshua came and visited her in a dream, and that is happening more and more and more supernaturally throughout the Arabic land. And we as Christians, especially Southern, Bible Belt people, we kind of shy away from like, oh my goodness, what do you mean a dream? But they are being radically saved as well. And it's important to know that. Yeah. I attended church in Jerusalem in the Arabic quarters. So, they're vastly being saved. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So,
and if you look at Iran, even the Iranian government of all,
she was Iranian. Yeah.
She was Iranian. Okay. The stats put out by the Iranian government, they're freaking out because people are leaving Islam in droves.
The Lord loves these people, and that's what we have to remember. But you're right. So somebody asked, who will be Yeshua's army?
I would think that would be the Jews that follow him, and the Christians, people that he comes
from,
people
who love him, and
yeah.
We could, this whole thing, I would love to talk more about Revelation, but there are many, many views, and that's the only reason, like, we kind of stay away from it.
Yeah.
And I mean, even like whether you're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, amillennial, there's a lot of different views out there, but basically anyone who loves Yeshua, who follows Yeshua with all their heart, soul, and mind, whenever you believe that we go to heaven, at whatever point in this whole tribulation event that we go, we will return with him to that's the wrong word, to come back down to heaven on earth. So,
Well, we're out of time. I will say the next chapter is how should we prepare ourselves for the kingdom of God? So I think your segue was a good one there. And Matthew, if we have more questions, we're going to have you back on. But for now, Shabbat Shalom.
You, Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.